There we go. Okay, I'll mute my screen. Tom, just tell me when you want me to click through.
Okay. Okay. Now, right. Is that, can everyone, has everyone got this one now? Oh, yes, you've muted, so you can't hear me. Right. The special winter birds of the Northumberland coast. Northumberland coast is absolutely amazing place. I've worked on the Northumberland coast for 35 years, and I kind of feel as if I know it sort of intimately. I've worked on the coast, but I've also birded on the coast in my spare time. And sort of, and I've mentioned earlier how I started bird watching sort of 5 decades ago, and a lot of my early bird watching was on the Northumberland coast. And it's not special just because I was bird watching there. It's just special because birds will come here. Next slide, M, please. So yeah, so the Northumberland coast is incredibly special. So, and it's not just us saying it's incredibly special. And it's, I'm just trying to get rid of this bottom bar here now, because it's anyway, no matter. So you can see here this list of designations, and it's not just us saying it's in the county saying Northumberland coast is special. These are national and international designations. This special protection areas, special area of conservation. These are international designations saying that the Northumberland coast is a special place. The Ramsar site is an international designation. The Ramsar is a convention. It's named after where the first convention was held, and there's the town called Ramsar in Iran. So it's not an acronym. It's a place. But what Ramsars are wetlands of international importance, and so nationally, locally, and internationally, we have there's some recognition of how important the Northumberland coast is. And what I want to do in the next while is to talk about how the various species that make the Northumberland coast special and why the Northumberland coast is special. So next slide, please, Em. So yes, the winter. So we're talking about winter birds here. So we can have quite a grim old winter at times, although it can be fairly benign compared to other places. But compared to the places where these birds that are visiting us come from, our winters are incredibly benign. The birds are emptying the Arctic, whether it's from the American Arctic or whether it's the Arctic that is pouring out, and they're pouring out just now. So that they're coming here, even though it's actually can be quite tough here. It's even tougher where they're coming from. So the next slide, please. And it's hard to imagine that these birds actually will kind of come here for safe haven, if you like. Next slide, please, Em. Oh. So the birds that come here, there's a great mixture of wildfowl and waders and species. And Lindisfarne National Nature Reserve is one of the, in fact, it is the jewel in the Northumberland coast crown. It's fabulous. There's huge numbers of birds coming here, and they range from, there's barnacle geese, there's brent geese, there's grey lags, there's pinkfeets, there's widgeon, there's teal, and there's not, as we're going to talk about those species in some detail when we get through there. But it's just a magnificent place to come bird watching, and it's just brilliant. You know, these birds are here because they want to be here, and it's absolutely incredible. So these are kind of a mixed flock of birds taken from the Hyded Ellick on the south end of Fenham Flats, looking north. But it just gives you a clue to the kind of the numbers of birds coming here and the activity, the intensity of birds that are coming here. Next slide, please, Em. So yes, the Lindisfarne National Nature Reserve is designated for a range of species, and one of the big species, the key species, is the Brent goose, and it's the light-bellied Brent goose that comes here, and they come from a particular place in the high Arctic. If we go to the next slide, and these are the light-bellied Brent geese, and these are coming down from Svalbard. There's not a big number of them. There's only about 7,000 or 8,000 birds at any good year. The population obviously goes up and down. And can you imagine these birds are breeding in such an inhospitable place, but they come to here and to Lindisfarne and to a place in northern Denmark. So there's only 2 places where this population of Svalbard Brent geese come to, and in some winters, when the weather's bad on the continent, the Danish birds will come over here, and we'll have the whole world population of Svalbard pale-bellied Brent geese at Lindisfarne, and that is a kind of a starter to kind of trying to figure out how important the Northumberland coast is and how special the Northumberland coast is. Next slide, please, Em. So yes, this is a shot of where Svalbard is. It's really it's an awful long way north, and these birds are making this migration every year. Next slide, please, Em. So this is a kind of a graphic of the journey that they have from Svalbard. They'll hit the North Norway coast, and then they'll gradually make their way down. And you can see where they're linking into Denmark, but they'll cross over into Lindisfarne. Now, what I want to do is to draw your attention to the illustration of the photograph of this Brent goose. It's not a particularly good photograph, but you can see why it's been taken. This bird is colour ringed. It's photographed by Ross Ahmed, and it's taken a long way off, but it's actually taken at Lindisfarne. So there should be another little slide drop in here, Em. That's it. So this bird was ringed in 1996 at Lindisfarne. And so it's at least 24 years old because it was ringed as an adult. And we don't know, could have been hatched that year or the year before, we don't know. But it's at least 24 years. And at the time, it was a new longevity record for that bird, for that population. But that bird has made the journey almost 48 times from Svalbard to Lindisfarne. So that's the 3,000 kilometers. Can you imagine? This bird has traveled that far, and it does it every year. What a fantastic story that is. And these birds are kind of are doing this every year, year in, year out. And if we move to the next slide, there is another example of how the 2 populations will join up. You can see the Lindisfarne point, and then if you move across on the right-hand side, you'll see Denmark, and you see a little mark on there. So anyway, this year there was a bird. Exactly this year there was a bird seen at Lindisfarne. Its colour ring was red, and within 2 weeks it was in Denmark. So there was some exchange between the 2 populations. So as I mentioned earlier, these are the 2 points where this Svalbard population of light-bellied Brent geese will winter. And so there is an exchange there. And there's quite a lot of exchange of information between the chap at Mortensen is the guy who is doing a lot of work on Danish pale-bellied Brent geese, and Steve Percival is the guy who's done a lot of work on Lindisfarne pale-bellied Brent geese. But this population, you know, this is it. This is the world population of this, or where these birds are, you know, absolutely amazing. So next slide, please, Em. But the birds we've just been talking about are light-bellied Brent geese, but we do get dark bellies. Now, dark bellies, it's not a different species, it's a different race. Dark bellies come from kind of the west and winter along the west. So they're coming down from Arctic Canada for a few, for the want of a better sort of description of it. So they're coming from an awful long way sort of to the west and to the north. And interestingly, these birds sort of winter in Ireland and along the south coast of the UK, and indeed into the East Anglia. But interestingly, in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, there's been a growth in the numbers of the dark-bellied Brent geese wintering at Lindisfarne as well. There's about 100 of them, but the number is growing. But they have a kind of slightly different habitat and where they feed. The dark-bellied Brent geese like to be on the grassy areas, as this one suggests, but they do go on the mud where the Brent geese kind of hang out. And these birds will, when they're on the mud, they're feeding on zostra, the kind of the eelgrass. So they're feeding on the sea-washed fine grass that grows in the intertidal mud areas. But it's interesting that this dark-bellied population is starting to kind of winter now, and it's a change of behaviour. Whether it's a climate change instigated thing, I don't know, but certainly there's a lot of work being carried. But it's fascinating how these things change. And if you look and if you watch long enough, you'll see change. And that's one of the fascinating things, I think, about bird watching. It's watching that change. Slide, please, Em. And following on from that change, we're seeing numbers of barnacle geese. Barnacle geese are wonderful. They're coming from the same place as the light-bellied Brent geese, and the geese are kind of split into two main groups. There's the black geese and there's the grey geese. The barnacles and the Brent geese are black geese. Canada geese are part of that same group, and the grey geese are pink feet and they're grey lags, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. But anyway, the barnacle geese, they're just wondrous birds. They're fantastic. And these, slide please, Em. And these birds are coming down to winter on the Solway. So they'll fly down the east coast of the east coast of UK. Next slide, please, Em. But they fly down the east coast of the UK, and they'll hit the Tyne Gap, and they'll cross to the west coast using the Tyne Gap. So they're using local geographical features in their migration, and it's quite incredible. But what we're seeing again through it's a subtle change, and when these birds are traveling, we're talking about tens of thousands of birds flying through, and what we're seeing is there's a population of about 600 or 700 of them now starting to overwinter at Lindisfarne, and this is a group of birds at Lindisfarne. So we're seeing a change. They're not actually making the journey because migration is one hell of an expensive thing, and it ultimately it'll cost their lives. So if they don't have to make the journey, they'll not make their journey. We'll talk about that in waders in a few minutes. But barnacle geese are some of them are not making that journey to the west coast, so they're staying, and that's one of the great spectacles. Next slide, please, Jen. So this is an adult barnacle goose close up, but you can see how different it is to the Brents. The Brents have got an all dark head, but a little pale fleck on the neck, whereas the barnacles, as you can see, all dark head, but it's got this white face, and it makes them stand out, and they're quite distinctive because of that white face. And these geese are not particularly big geese. The Brents are the smallest of the geese that we have, and they're not much bigger than Sheldrake. And barnacle geese are slightly bigger. But these are coming through in quite good numbers, and the migration has gone through, but there's still a population at Lindisfarne overwintering, and this is as a direct result of climate change. Next, Em. So yes, we see an illustration here of their migration. So when they're coming down from Svalbard, they nest in such a precarious place. I don't know if you saw Life of Birds, was it? Oh, one of the Attenborough programs where they had barnacle geese. They were nesting on the top of precipitous cliffs, and when the young were big enough, they would just take a step off and they would just fall several hundred feet and bounce on the way down to the bottom of the cliff. And because they were so downy, they would bounce, and they would, generally speaking, they would survive the whole kind of the most tremendous, the most sort of difficult sort of start to any bird's life you can imagine, actually falling off a 200-foot cliff to the bottom, where the adults are waiting for them to gather them up and take them off on migration. And then they start the perilous journey of crossing the Arctic Ocean, hitting Norway, then they hit the UK coast, and then, as I mentioned, they'll fly down the east coast of Britain till they hit the Scotland, then they hit the Northumberland, then they hit the Tyne Gap, and they'll cross over that way. Fabulous journey, amazing journey, and they'll winter on the Solway. But we're privileged to have a few of those birds wintering here now, and you can easily see them. If you go to Alec, south end of the Fenham Flats, as I mentioned earlier, go to the Hyde there, and I think it's currently locked because of COVID. If you go there and you can see them, they're in big numbers, they're in fields there as well. Absolutely wonderful. Next slide, please, Em. So we're moving on to grey geese, and the most familiar of the grey geese are the grey lags. The grey lags, we can tell then because they've got a big orange bill. You can easily see that there, big orange conch. And, you know, there are an awful lot of feral grey lags around. And it's kind of confusing because a number of years ago, we always thought that the grey lags we saw in the wintertime came from Iceland. And you kind of think, well, with the numbers of feral birds around, it's kind of confusing. It's very, very difficult to kind of appreciate that there could well still be some Icelandic birds in there. But again, Lindisfarne was designated because of the numbers of grey lags coming there. We've got the next slide. There was this great incident of this bird turned up on the Alne estuary, and you can see it's got a collar on there. It looks pretty awful, I agree, but actually the bird was fine, and it looks tight, but it's not really that tight. But you can see it's got a ring on as well. But you looked at the number. I read the number on the neck collar, and I was assuming that this was going to be a UK bred bird, kind of because there is this exchange between the Lake District and Yorkshire. And I thought it was going to be one of those birds. But anyway, I reported it in through the system. And it turned out that this bird had been ringed in Iceland in the previous summer. So it was an Icelandic bred bird. So here's me sort of lull myself at the idea of kind of not many birds are coming, not many grey lags are coming from Iceland now. And here is one in front of my very eyes, an Icelandic grey lag goose. So yes, whenever you see the feral birds around in the fields, just think that one of those or several of those could actually be wild birds from Iceland, but they're still coming through. So next slide, please. But the bird that really is so evocative of kind of autumn migration in terms of wildfowl is this species. Next slide, please, then. And this is pink feet or pink-footed goose or pink-feeted goose. It's quite a hard sort of thing to get around, but they're coming down in their big numbers, and they're still traveling through now, and we're seeing them early part of the winter, end of September, October, and November. They were flying through here in very big numbers, and you'll have heard them, you'll have seen them, and they come through quite high, and they've got this wonderful noise they make, the contact noise they make. It's sort of like small dogs barking at each other, and they'll just capture that thing and they'll just keep in contact. Next slide, please, Em. And they'll just fly. It's really quite high, and they're coming through in quite big V formations. So this is what a pink-footed goose looks like. Superficially, like a grey lag, of course, because of they're the same family, grey geese. But look at its bill. Quite discreet, and its head is much smaller than a grey lag. But look at its bill; it's got a black tip, but it's got that pink band to it, and that's a classic pink-footed goose. But you look at its legs; of course, it's got pink legs. But these birds are coming through. But traditionally, a lot of the pink feet were coming, and they were heading to the Norfolk coast. That's where they want to be. Traditionally, that's where they winter. But in recent years, there's been numbers of birds hanging into Northumberland. And of course, we've had this group at Lindisfarne for a very long time. But there's a group now on Druidge Bay, and there's a group in Millfield. So through the winter time, there's an exchange between these three populations. So we're seeing pinkfeet flying all the time, and they'll be flying to little feeding forays at the local fields as well, which kind of think, well, what's going on there? But actually, there's that little bit of exchange going on. But for me, they just epitomise kind of wildfowl migration, and they're wonderful. If you go to the next slide, and here's a kind of a map of ringing recoveries of pinkfeet, and you can see the majority of the birds coming to the UK are coming from Iceland, and that was where we thought the population was. But in recent years, because of satellite tracking, can you next slide, please, Em? We're finding that there's more and more birds coming from Greenland, and they're coming from an awful long way north in Greenland. Look at these are traces of satellite tracked birds, and you can see how far north these birds are coming, actually from a very long way. And it wasn't so many years ago that we were quite concerned about pinkfeet. because the population looked as if it was in a kind of a down, such an incredible downward spiral, almost a terminal spiral. But it's bucked the trend, and the population is on the rise, and it's just the numbers of birds coming through are just, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of birds. I was involved in a contract on the east coast of Scotland in the Montrose Basin, tracking grey and pinkfeet. And on the arrival, and the kind of the few days of the main arrival in the basin, we counted 165,000 of these birds in a very small area. Can you imagine these pinkfeet just in that area? And they're all coming down from Greenland and Iceland. Absolutely stupendous. Next slide, please, then. But associated with these other kind of geese, we'll kind of find one or two other species of grey geese, and these are European white fronts. The white fronts, as the name suggests, have got a white front, superficially again like the grey lags. But look at the markings on the belly. This is a giveaway, and the white front is a giveaway as well. White fronts, but there are two races of white fronts. There's the European birds, which are coming from Northern Europe and from Arctic Russia. But there's also this other population of white fronts, and they're coming down from Greenland as well. And sometimes they're quite difficult to tell, but the Greenland ones have slightly different coloured bills and different markings on the belly. We don't see that many Greenland birds here now as we used to, but they're coming through. And this is part of a group of about 12 that spent the majority of last winter on the Allen Estuary, feeding in a field, and they were quite approachable, and they were quite relatively tame for wild birds. But there are white fronts. We also get bean geese coming through, and in small numbers as well. And there are two different types of bean geese. There are taiga and tundra, and these are coming from the high Arctic as well. I will not go into the details of those, but I just wanted to give you a slight insight to kind of some of the other grey geese that are coming through and spending winter with us as well, but in small numbers. Next slide, please, Em. But it's the wet fields are kind of a key to and a clue to what else we have coming here. We've got other species of wildfowl. Next species, next slide, please, Next species. Widgeon are coming down. Again, Lindisfarne is famous, rightly famous for the numbers. 40,000 widgeon will winter, or at least spend the front half of the winter at Lindisfarne. And when it gets to kind of the back end of the year, and a lot of those birds will disperse from Lindisfarne. They'll go down to the west coast, the Wirral, for example, and then as the winter kind of comes to an end, they'll make their way back north again and fly and ready for their emigration back north to their breeding grounds. But they're just a delightful duck. These are mainly males. We've got the next slide. There's a pair there, and when they first arrive, they're coming in, and the plumages are really quite obscure because they're going through their molt. Wildfowl have this strange molt strategy. They will molt all of their flight feathers at the same time, and you think, well, that's a kind of for a bird, that's kind of a pretty stupid thing to do, to become flightless. But they're flightless for a short period, and in that period they have what's known as an eclipsed plumage. So they become quite mottled, become quite cryptic, and this enables them to be able to hide away out of sight. So that, because they're quite vulnerable, obviously, because they can't fly, so they can hide away with their cryptic plumage. But as their molt progresses, they'll attain their full breeding plumage, and it kind of roundabout now, a lot of the wildfowl that we're seeing are just in their spankiest plumage just now. This is a male and female widgeon, and they're just absolutely wonderful. And they're coming into this plumage just now, and they're wonderful. They're absolutely brilliant. But these birds are coming in the big numbers, and even on a small estuary like the Allen, that's my home patch. We have something like 700 birds here, which is big numbers for such a small estuary. So they're kind of spending time here. So the next slide, please, then. I mean, this illustration gives us a clue to where these birds are coming from, and these are wintering widgeon, and you can see they're coming from quite a long way, kind of long way north. And it's hard to imagine the north, but these are into Arctic Russia here. So these birds are coming. But interestingly, widgeon are still a quarry species, so they're still shot at Lindisfarne, or at least some of them are still shot. Well, they only get short ones. Anyway, sorry. Next slide, please. Another kind of bird that comes here in big numbers is the teal. This is a female teal. Next slide, please. This is the male teal. These are the smallest of the ducks that we have coming to the UK. And again, they're coming from a similar place, and I'll show you an illustration shortly. But again, they're coming into this marvelous, this wonderful plumage. Absolutely fantastic. So this is a male. The previous shot was a female, and it's interesting that there is this sexual dimorphism between males and females in terms of their plumage. But you look at the wing here, you can see the little colourful patch on the wing, and this is the and most duck species have a colourful speculum. But you can see where the name for the colour teal comes from. It's perfect. But if you're seeing ducks around and you're not quite sure of the species, just look at the end of this, the back end of this teal, and look at that yellow triangle. And if you see a yellow triangle on a small duck, and it's a teal basically, and you've got it sorted. But they're quite pretty. But we do see the odd green-winged teal, which is a North American species, and they will come to the UK in very small numbers. But if you see that white line on the wing there, it's when the bird's sort of sitting in the water, that's horizontal. But a green-winged teal, that line will be vertical, and when you see that, it sort of runs down the side of the breast as opposed to running along the wing. So that's teal. So next slide, please. And this is a clue again to where teal are coming from. So some are actually coming from Iceland, but the vast majority are coming from continental Europe. And there is a sort of a spread right through Europe on these birds. These are ringing recoveries, by the way. We've got a beginning and an end location on these birds. But you can see there's a vast majority coming from Eastern Europe. Absolutely amazing. And there will be some spillage in the birds to the south of us in kind of the Iberian Peninsula and through France. This is a spillage, that's an odd phrase, but as if the winter's bad, a lot of these birds will be pushed out by the bad weather, and they'll head south before they'll head back north again. So these birds will be recovered during bad winters. Next slide, please. So when you talk about wildfowl, you cannot ignore whooper swans, and whooper swans have been coming through in quite good groups at the last few weeks, and we recognise them because they have this wonderful whooping noise they make. Wonderful. And we know exactly where these birds are coming from. But I just want to dwell a little bit on the idea of a whooper swan. If you kind of know this, bear with me a little bit, but I like kind of to share this so we all have the same level of information. So look at the bills. They're black bills, but look at the yellow patches. They're yellow triangles on these bills, and it's quite extensive, this yellow triangle, and it's quite clear. On a Buick swan, which is quite closely related to whooper swan, this yellow patch is not a triangle. The triangle is cut short, so it's not pointed like this. So and of course Buick swans are slightly smaller, but they are quite rare now in this part of the world. So, but we're seeing quite good numbers of whooper swan. Lindisfarne is good for them. You'll see them in fields. Right down through past me between Warkworth and Almouth here, there's regularly wintering herds of them in fields there. They're feeding, and they'll mix with mute swans as well. But we'll see them feeding in the fields there. They're just feeding on kale or rape is one of their favourite things. But these birds are coming down from Iceland. And we get the next slide. And you can see these are traces. These are satellite traces on these exactly where these whooper swans are coming from, Iceland. And there's this great tale of a jumbo jet pilot flying from the US to the UK, and he looks out of his window, to see what's going on. And he sees this group of hooper swans flying alongside of him at 35,000 feet. And that's just a great clue to kind of how their migration sort of works. Incredible, absolutely incredible. Next slide, please. And here's the Buick swan, just to sort of give you an idea. You just look at the yellow on the bill, and it's much shorter than the big yellow triangle on a hooper swan. But as I mentioned, these are much rarer these days. There was a couple spent a wee bit of time a couple of winters ago on the River Coquet near the Weir with other hooper swan with hooper swans there. And the Buick swan was named after Thomas Buick, of course. Next slide, please. So yes, moving away from wildfowl, I want to sort of have a look now at mud and how useful and valuable mud is. So next slide, please. And the estuaries are really perfect for this, and the intertidal areas are great. So next slide, please. But this is Lindisfarne. You look at all of across the mud flats at Lindisfarne, and these are all ragworm, lugworm casts. You know, these are invertebrates that are living in the mud here. That's their life. And for 1 cubic meter of intertidal mud, there is more biomass than an Amazon rainforest. There's not the diversity there, but there's more biomass. This intertidal mud is just one of the richest food sources that you can imagine. That's why the birds are coming here. The invertebrate eating birds are coming here. So next slide, please. And by the invertebrate eating birds, I mean the curlews, the wading birds. Curlew is probably the largest of the ones we've got. And this is a curlew in flight. Next slide, please. But you see that long bill they have, and just as an aside, you can't sex curlews to plumage, but you can on their bill size. And female curlews have much longer bills than male curlews, and female curlews will tend to stay longer on the estuarine or riverine mud than the males. We'll see curlews in fields, and more than likely they will be all males. So these birds are feeding on invertebrates within the mud, and they can probe their bills in an incredibly long way. These birds are adapted to feeding in the estuarine mud, intertidal mud. Next slide, please. You see they like to get into the salt marsh. This looks like a female, the size of that bill, incredible. But you think, well, where are these birds coming from that spend their winter here? We know the UK population of breeding curlews is going down. So where are they going? What are these UK birds? No, they're not. The first wave of curlews we see on the coast during the autumn are sure enough, they'll be UK birds, but they will leave. And if you see the next slide, these are where our wintering curlews are coming from. They're coming from Western Scandinavia and into Eastern Scandinavia into Western Russia. And whilst our breeding birds are leaving the country, they're heading south into the Iberian Peninsula. So there is a change. There's a change going on, and this is known as partial migration. So whilst we still have the species here, we kind of lose the individuals out of that population. So this is partial migration. So yes, when you go out onto the coast and you see curlews, you'll reckon that these birds are coming from eastern Finland and western Russia. We know that because of ringing recoveries, of course. Next slide, please. Another long-billed bird is the bar-tailed godwit. There's 2 species of godwit here, and the first one we'll look at will be bar-tails. And this is a nice group of bar-tails. Next slide, please. In flight. And if you look at the tail here, you can see it's got bars on its tail. This bird watching is pretty easy, isn't it? Just what it is. Bars on the tail, bar-tailed godwit. Look at the bill. quite straight compared to a curlew, but just pay a little attention to that bill again. You'll see just a slight upturn, and that will help separate this species from its close relative, the black-tailed godwit. Next slide, please. So there's the black-tailed godwit, bar-tailed godwit. So they're wintering quite big numbers with this, and again you can see the bar tail on this quite nicely. Next slide, please. And again, next slide, please. And we're seeing here where the bar tails are coming from, and they will. Some of them will winter here. They're coming down from a long way north and east. Some will winter, and some will carry on to further south into North Africa, and they'll use the UK and the East Coast as a staging post, as a service station to recoup their strength before they head north. There are a range of races of bar-tailed godwits around the Northern Hemisphere, and there's this population that breeds in Alaska and indeed in and eastern Siberia into the far north. And we know that population winters in New Zealand and in East Coast Australia. We know that through ring recoveries, but we didn't know how they got there. Do they stage on the sea? Do they stop? How do they do that? And a couple of years ago, there was a project which put radio satellites or satellite trackers onto a group of these bar-tailed godwits, and they were tracked flying from their breeding grounds in Alaska to their wintering grounds in New Zealand, and they flew 7,000 kilometers non-stop across the ocean, across the Pacific Ocean. 7,000 kilometers non-stop. Absolutely phenomenal. Migration is just one of those most amazing things. And we wouldn't have known that if it hadn't been for technology. And with technology, it's just allowing us to peel back little layers, and we're realizing how little we did know, how little we know actually about our wintering birds and birds, our breeding birds. It's just amazing. And really, I'm never ceased to be in awe of these sorts of stories. Fantastic. Next slide, please, Em. Here's a nice sort of illustration here, but it gives you a clue to two of the races that we see coming through here. Laponica is the one that breeds in Lapland, as the name suggests, and they will probably winter here, whereas the Tamirenisans, they'll be sort of breeding further north and east, and they will be using the British coast as a staging post before they head down into Africa. And it's quite interesting how that works, and we need to understand the different strategies of the different races to enable us to enact the right sort of conservation measures. Because if we thought, well, if they're all Laponica, we target our measures that way and miss out on the other races and actually cause a bit of an issue. So yes, we need to know exactly what's going on with each race of these birds. Next slide, please. So the black-tailed godwits, and these are starting just to winter with us in small numbers now. And as the name suggests, they have black tails. And every one of these, apart from that starling at the top, has a black tail, tells it from the bar tails. But also look at the big white band on the wing. The bar-tailed godwit doesn't have that. And so there's an awful lot of white on a black-tailed godwit. Next slide, please. So yes, another close-up of a black-tail's tail and how they like to feed in the mud. Next slide, please. And you can just pick out here just the straight bill compared to the just slightly upturned bar-tailed godwit bill. I'm sure you can pick that out. But look at the colour of this bird. This photograph was taken in August time, and these birds are just starting to come through in that August sort of window, and they're still retaining some of their breeding plumage. Fantastic looking bird. Next slide, please. And it's losing its winter plumage, its summer plumage now, just a wee bit. But you can see that again, it's feeding on the estuarine and intertidal mud. So important for this species. This species spends most of its winter on the south coast of the UK, and again, we're seeing a change, and there's this little shift of these birds now, sort of with the 20s and 30s of the wintering on the in our part of the world. Next slide, please. Again, we're seeing where some of the recoveries are coming from, and there's been a lot of work being carried out on the population, and birds have been ringed. But we see the birds are coming from Iceland, and these are the Limosa race of black-tailed goblets, which is the species or the race that we get coming through the UK. There is a continental Europe race which we generally don't see in the UK, which again is quite important in terms of their conservation value. Next slide, please. But yes, moving away from the estuarine mud, we're coming onto the sandy sections of the coast, and there's a sand specialist that we'll all be familiar with. Next slide, please. And it's the sanderling. You know, we're quite familiar with seeing the sanderling sort of rushing up and down on the shoreline in small groups. Next slide, please. They're running up and down on the shoreline, feeding. You know, how the sea breaks, and the sea will just sort of upturn just granules of sand, and these birds will be feeding on microscopic invertebrates that have been turned over by the sand, by the breaking sea. Next slide, please. And look how white they are. Look how white they are. I'm sure we're all familiar with seeing these birds scurrying up and down the beach, and they'll be in quite good numbers as well. But on the sandy shore, these birds are sandy shore specialists. It's quite hard to say that. Next slide, please. See how white that bird is. Black legs, black bill. Brilliant, actually wonderful. Next slide, please. But this is how they're kind of coming back to us in through the summer and early autumn. This is a bird just coming out of its breeding plumage. And I tell you, almost every bird watcher, when it gets to sort of July time, when you see your first returning sanderling, and you think, what on earth is that? And you have to, oh yes, that's a sanderling. But it looks so different to the sanderling that we're familiar with in the wintertime. Next slide, please. And keep an eye out, because we're looking for colorings. You see this bird has got colorings on here, and that helps us to figure out where these birds are coming from. Next slide, please. And this is what's happening. Birds are coming down from both sides, and they're coming through the UK. And but there's a bigger chance to see that the birds that we are seeing are coming through Greenland, because the Eastern European birds don't tend to come here. They'll go straight down into the Iberian Peninsula. And the bird that I showed earlier with the colour rings, that had been ringed in Orkney the previous year, and that's been seen previously in Iceland as well. So that bird is actually staging through Orkney and sort of wintering on the Northumberland coast near Alnmouth. So yes, that's another little sort of story about sanderling. Great. Next slide, please. Probably the most numerous wading bird that we have wintering on the Northumberland coast is the dunlin, and they love to be in amongst the seaweeds, the rotten seaweeds, because there's just so much food there. Next slide, please. And this is how they look. They're very small waders, but they have a little white flash in their wing, and they stay in quite good flocks. In the breeding plumage, we'll see them with dark bellies. Next slide, please. Here's a nice dunlin, which is just coming out of its summer plumage. You can see the black flecks just on the side of its breast there, and it's just molting out into its winter plumage. chestnutty patches on its back there, they will be moulded into much paler browns when it comes into its winter plumage. This is feeding on rack, and you can see it's actually got a tasty morsel there. And these will be, it feeds on whelk eggs, which have been kind of caught in amongst all the rotting seaweed, and they'll feed on sandfly larvae as well. Next slide, please. And this is in summer plumage. You see how dark a belly it's got, quite distinctive in summer plumage. And we see them coming at the end of the winter. We'll see them this way, and at the early part of the autumn, we'll see them in this way as well. Next slide, please. And you can see we're getting a number of different populations of dunlin coming through, and it's hard to tell them apart. Although, if you have there's a difference in stature when it comes to the different races, and you get one from the extreme north and one from the extreme south. The extreme north one will look bigger than the one from the extreme south of the breeding range, and the bills will be longer. So you can't tell the difference when it comes to extremes. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now an evocative species here. We got a Lindisfarne. This is the red knot, or as it's known as the red knot, because in the summer, in the breeding plumage, it is red. However, when we tend to see them mainly is when they're not red. And this is a big number of these knot at Lindisfarne, feeding on the mud at Lindisfarne. Next slide, please. But this is how they look normally in the winter time, very grey. So and they feed on the intertidal mud, but they're quite attractive. They're mid-sized wader. Green legs gives you an idea. When you see green legs, it helps you in the idea of this species. Next slide, please. There's going to be one or two maps coming up now just to sort of give us a clue to where these birds are coming from. The number of races of knot across the world. You can see how they're circumpolar, really, and there is a number of different races, and you see where they're going to. So your next slide, please. But these are the ones coming through the UK, and we're seeing a lot of knot coming from Arctic Canada. Believe it or not, Arctic Canada. These birds flying all that way along the kind of north of Greenland, flying along the west coast of Greenland before they hit us. And some of these birds will actually get down into Africa, and some of the birds from the east will get down into South Africa, so the Cape of. I've seen knot myself right down in breeding plumage, right down at Cape Horn. Quite incredible how they will move through here. Some will stay, some will use it as a service station, and that's something that we have to get our minds around. The birds will be traveling through here. Not everyone stays. And migration is quite a costly thing. Next slide, please. Not with colour rings. This is how we're finding out what's happening with these birds. Next slide, please. Golden plover. Big numbers of golden plover. Next slide, please. And grey plover. Much smaller numbers of grey plover. Winter on the Northumberland coast. Next slide, please. But again, we can see where these birds are coming from. These grey plover are coming just from the near continent, if you like, to winter with us. Next slide, please. Lapwing, family member of the plovers. You know, we have them as a breeding species, but we also have them as wintering as well. Next slide, please. The UK birds will leave at the end of summer, like the curlews do. They'll travel south, and during the autumn and into winter we get continental birds. Next slide, please. We can see where the lapwings are coming from. You can see some of these, the purple ones here. You see how these are lapwings have been ringed in the UK, and they've been tracked further south into the Iberian Peninsula through France and even into North Africa. These are birds leaving the UK after breeding season, and the yellow ones are birds coming to the UK for wintering. Next slide, please. Ring plover, yes, quite an attractive small wave that we see quite regularly on the coast, but numbers are going down. Next slide, please. Again, quite distinctive in flight. You can see the white collar, the ringed collar, quite distinctive. Next slide, please. And we can see the origins of the ringed plover. They come through in several waves from northern birds and birds from further north. And you can see how they're traveling through the UK to get into their winter quarters. Again, it's a similar strategy to some of the other species where they'll use the UK as a service station, and some will actually travel on, and some will actually winter with us. Next slide, please. Oyster catcher, yes, one of the most ubiquitous and easily observed and easily identified waders that we have on our bit of coastline. Next slide, please. They do breed with us. They'll breed in the upland rivers, but it's not these birds that we see on the coast in the wintertime. Next slide, please. And this, it's a similar story to many other species. They're partial migrants, and these orange lines are indicating how the UK breeding birds are leaving in the autumn, and they're being backfilled by birds from Greenland, Iceland, and northern Scandinavia to winter here. So there's a big change going on there, and hopefully you'll get a mindset now how this thing kind of moves around a wee bit, and it's not just the birds that we see in the summertime or the birds that we see in the wintertime. And another, it gives you a clue to how special the Northumberland coast is. Next slide, please. Next slide. And redshanks, the keeper of the marsh. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Same story. So the birds are coming from Iceland to winter here. It's a similar scenario. Next slide, please. Now moving on to the rocky shore. There's some rocky shore specialists here as well. Next slide, please. Stag rocks. We all know about stag rocks. The rocky shore is important, and it's the rocky shore which is designated as the special protection area. Next slide, please. And it's important for two species. First of these is the turnstone, and we see them sort of, but the turnstone will feed on soft shore as well. Next slide, please. Very pretty, but they really are sort of hanging into the hard areas. But it's the orange legs that gives it away in a sense, not to be confused with redshank. Next slide, please. Summer plumage turnstone. How orange they are with a white head. Fabulous. Sometimes we see them in this plumage during the early autumn and late spring. These birds can start their return migration in June. Believe it or not, they're only gone for a couple of months. Could well be failed breeders, but they'll be for wading birds. Autumn migration starts at end of June into July. Incredible. So we're seeing these birds coming through at that time. Next slide, please. And I've been involved in quite a lot of work on turnstones. You can see this bird's got a colour ring, got colour rings on it, and you may well be able to pick out just a little line that's running from the centre of its back. This is a radio transmitter aerial, and it's on the bird for about 2 weeks, then it falls off. And what I was involved with, the work I was involved with, was trying to figure out what the home range is during the winter time of turnstones. And so we caught a number of them on Druidge Bay, and every 2 days I went out with my radio receiver and tracked these birds. There was about a dozen of them, and I tracked them. And for about 2 to 3 weeks, the length of the time that the aerial stayed on, it's glued to the feathers on the back, and the glue fades, and then the thing falls off. And but we discovered that the home range of a turnstone during winter is only about 3 to 4 kilometers of where it actually makes land. In fact, the 3 to 4 kilometers of from where we ringed them, which was quite interesting. But also, what we have found out that the offshore islands, Coquet Island, for example, is incredibly important for wintering birds. And these birds, when it comes to the high tide in the dark, these birds will travel to these offshore islands to have their overnighting, if you like. And I travelled across to Coquet Island with my transmitter, with the help of Paul Morrison, the RSPB site manager. And I went across and discovered the several birds across there. And it's quite an interesting piece of work. But anyway, next slide, please. Has it stopped? Oh no, here we go. And yes, and this is where the birds are coming from. So it's two routes we're seeing. And again, as we've talked, birds are coming through from the east, and they're the birds which are tending to go further on. And the birds that are coming from the north and a bit to the west, from Greenland, Iceland, for example, they're the birds that are wintering with us. So yes, there's two distinctive populations there. Fascinating. Next slide, please. So yes, the rocky shore again continues on the rocky shore. Now, I want to talk briefly about a true rocky shore specialist. Next slide, please. Slowing down. Has it stopped? Yeah.
I think maybe my internet's just going quite slow.
All right. Okay. I'm conscious of time here, and we can do the purple sandpipers, then jump to the end if you like.
Yeah, maybe. Does it work now? Is it the next one?
No, I haven't got the next one yet. Oh, sorry about this, folks.
Oh no, we're plagued.
So the purple sandpiper is the species I want to talk about here. And oh, here we go. Here we go. This is a mixed group of purple sandpipers and turnstones. How this is at the tumblers at just north of Sea Houses, and they really do like the rocky shore. Next slide, please. Em, can we get the next slide? But it's the offshore islands which are quite important: Coquet Island and the Farne Islands. Next slide, please. And the Coquet Island is I've spent a little bit of time in the winter on there looking at purple sandpipers. This is where they like to hang out. On the Farne Islands, they like to be on the outer group as well. So there's big numbers of them. They're quite sort of vulnerable because they are so specialist, and it's one of the named species on the Northumbria Shore SPA, Special Protection Area. So there's purple sandpiper and turnstone as wintering birds. So it's and these are coming from a particular area. Back in the day, we were kind of only thought they came from Norway, but actually they come from further afield. So we've recently discovered. Next one slide, please. Yes, so they're easily pushed off these rocks by tides. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. See the orange legs as well, but this is right into winter plumage, and But when it comes at the summer plumage, the grey back turns a wee bit purpley, hence the name. That's where it comes from. Next slide, please. This is a bird coming out of changing from winter plumage into breeding plumage. Yellowish bill, yellowish legs, orangey, but it's that kind of grey purpley colour. But they're so attractive. These and you know they're so discreet that they're into rocks and the crevices. And over the years, I've been to places and counted loads of these, and we always kind of reckon that for every two you count, or every two purple sandpipers you count, there's another one hidden away somewhere, and so you can never really get to the bottom of the numbers of them. It's incredible, and these birds are coming here to winter, and as I mentioned, it's part of the reason why the Northumbria shore is designated as a special protection area. Next slide, please, Em. But this is where these birds are coming from, and initially we thought they were just coming from northern Norway. But subsequently we've discovered that they're coming down from Iceland, and importantly they're coming down from Svalbard. You see that one right at the top right? That's a bird that's in Svalbard. Next slide, please. And a couple of winters ago, I was on Kokit counting purple sandpipers. And it wasn't until I got home and I was going through my photographs that I discovered this one had a leg flag on. I can read the number. And I got in touch with the ringing people straight away. And this bird had been ringed the previous summer in Svalbard, and it was spending its winter on Kokit Island. So that's a confirmation of kind of the journey that this bird has taken, and possibly, probably the birds around it have taken as well. Next slide, please. But one of the big deals of the coast actually is disturbance, and that's kind of stimulated an awful lot of the work that I've been involved with recently. Next slide, please. And it's kind of dog walkers and walkers generally. There's a lot more people using the coast. This is not Northumberland, this is Durham, but it kind of illustrates the point where just so many more people are using the shore than ever was. And it's just incredible. And our bird populations are under so much pressure. Next slide, please. So yes, I'm conscious of time, Em, and I'm just going to move into a different section of seabirds, but I can easily finish here if you like, or carry on.
Yeah, maybe we should skip to the end. It's a shame, but yeah, time's ticking.
Yeah, that's what I'm conscious of. And I'm just going to talk about divers and grebes and one or two things. But anyway, just can you find the end slide? You'll notice the end because it's got the end on it. Thanks for listening. There's quite a lot to go at, you see.
Oh, hang on. Maybe I just do it the easy way.
We're getting there. That's it. Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. So sorry about the kind of the rush at the end there, folks, but can I just, before we get to the end, I just wanted something. 2 slides up. Next one. Next one up. That one, yeah, that one.
This one?
Yes, that's it, yeah. Just talk about that one briefly. that one, the 101. Can you click that one?
Yeah, the great black back and the razor bill.
That's it, yeah. When it comes to the end of the winter, the seabirds that we have breeding in the summertime are starting to come back inshore, and it's a dangerous game, and it can be actually expensive. It can cost your life. This is a razorbill which has came in early and has just got caught on the shore because of bad weather, and it's fallen victim to a greater blackback gull, and just shows how life is kind of just, the whole thing is just a jeopardy situation. And it's spent its whole winter out at sea, going through all of the kind of the the tough weather to come inshore to fall victim to a greater black-backed gull. But of course, the greater black-backed gull has got to live as well. So if we can cut the end, that'll do. And thank you for listening, folks. And apologies for the kind of technical hitches. And so, can you go to the last slide, please, Em?
Yeah.
Great. So yes, thank you for listening, and apologies again. And I hope you enjoyed the bit that you got. But it was a bit of a race at the finish.
Anyone have any? Do you want to stop recording them and then do you want to go to questions?
Yeah.